We also have the option to invert these alphas. So now that I painted in some grass, say I want the opposite. I want a little bit of dirt in the center and the grass up on the edges. So I can simply invert the alpha. You'll see they simply switch. They invert. We talked about destroy. We can also subdivide our geometry. Comes in a little handy when we're creating, say, a cave. Let's go ahead and create a wall that we'll add to our displacement with. So we'll just copy one of these walls, drag it right in somewhere within our level, and we're going to texture that with our blender grass, or maybe some kind of cave wall texture. We could look for something that's more, maybe a cliff dirt. There you go. Blend of a dirt cliff. Apply that. Just click the one face that we're after, displacement create. We're going to stick with a similar power, so when we get into sewing, we'll realize how important that can be. It is possible to control-click multiple displacements and paint them at once. So now I have the option of coming in here. I'm still on the z-axis. You see the arrow pointed up. It's not really helping me too much as I go along in here. I'm going to raise or lower. Let's bring it out along the x-axis. Kind of bulge it on the bottom there. We get this kind of rock face coming out along the bottom, and maybe along the top, just kind of jutting out there. I mean, some dramatic big juts coming out towards us here. So if we're standing here, they're looming overhead, little bits, and just keep doing whatever you feel is appropriate to make your level here. Okay, so you get this kind of cool effect of this looming cliff and these rocks. We could come in here with our painting alpha, paint in some more, raise or lower, paint in some more influence into the rock or the dirt to just kind of blend it more into the grass. Switch it, invert it. Alright, so let's just make sure our room is all sealed up. We'll check out how the displacements are currently working. And then before we go through the rest of the displacement tools, let's just make sure everything's working out. Make sure no displacements are causing leaks and all your brush geometry is sealing off your level. Come in here and just add a simple light. Cast some shadows and stuff. Put it in the middle of the room. We're going to save it as Noesis Displacements. Let's just give it a run before we go through the rest of the displacement tools. So we'll just run the map, normal, normal, normal. Okay. And we should be able to kind of run over and down our different hillsides and grasses. Yeah, there we go. So you'll see I have these little divots. You can jump, climb up these. Can't quite make it up there. Give it a jump. Oh, we got over. And we got the cool different elevations. We have a little overhang here of our rock. Instantly a much cooler looking level than just the developer box we had. So let's go over how we can create caves a little better and how we can sew geometry to make things a little easier as we go on. Okay, let's go to a new map. With our block tool, with a primitive block, just with simple texture selected, we can go back to our dev textures if we'd like. Whoop. Dev. Choose one of our generic measured textures. And let's just create a few pieces of brush geometry which will subdivide into a cave. We're going to create a floor, but we're going to want to divide that floor into a few different sections. Because when working with displacements, it's important to keep objects of a similar size so that our endpoints will align. Don't need it quite so thick, so something like that. Check out what we're doing. There we go. Okay. We're going to duplicate this guy a few times. So 1, 2, and 3. We'll build up the walls and a roof. So let's just shift drag this guy up, give it some depth, something substantial. Bring it to the other side. We'll leave the center hollow. Drag him up, bring him back down. and one to fill the gap. Now we basically have a tunnel now, but it's a square block. It's not very exciting whatsoever. So let's make it far more interesting with displacements. We could just grab all these interior points, create displacements of the same power, and start pulling around our points, painting our geometry. But if we were to create this guy, remember, it's going to make the rest of our objects disappear. So let's destroy that, get everything back. We want the front of our cave. This little lip here at the bottom, perhaps. We're also going to want the back if we intend to come through and see it from the other side. You may not need the sides depending on where this is going in your level, but for now, let's create displacements out of these faces. We'll leave them all at a power of 3. And boom, we're working with a lot of displacements at once. It's going to be easier to paint them with all of them selected. Any painting that we do, we can affect all at once. Undo that. But to create a rounded off shape, basically to take two faces that share similar displacement points and round those off, or kind of average the points between adjacent faces. So we'll click the subdivide button. Might take a few seconds. We have this kind of warp portal effect here. It's subdivided evenly, all our faces. So it's kind of an interesting look, especially with our developer texture. May not be exactly what we have in mind. So, all right, so with all our faces still selected, looks like we forgot to undo that move, but still get the idea. We can add noise in our face edit sheet, which is going to make this a little less perfect, or a lot less perfect, depending on the minimum and maximum values which you designate. So you can take a look at our 2D views to kind of see what's going on as well. Let's give a minimum unit displacement noise of about, we want something pretty good, about 2 units, and a maximum of maybe as many as 8. Maybe too many, but we'll check it out. Okay. Nope. See, it's added a little bit of difference inside our tunnel. Now we can keep adding more noise. Maybe even step it up a bit. And you'll see it keeps kind of crushing in. Now we're getting these edges that are just kind of wrinkly and jagged, no longer completely smooth. Now you can keep adding noise. It's kind of bringing it in. Or we can go back inside now and paint our geometry. Maybe just bring up our radius to something good. It's kind of a big tunnel we got here. Check out which way you're painting geometry. And adjust your faces. Now, this developer texture kind of a little tricky to get a feel for everything that's going on, so you could change that to more of a cliff face or something if you want to see it, or if you want to paint alpha to blend stuff in. But really, you can come in here and we can raise or lower sections to make this more of a cave. Some high sides, and it's probably not going to be a perfect tube, so you can kind of bring up one side or bring down the ceiling on one side. It's kind of a collapsed area. Your exit's probably not going to be so perfect. You can bring down portions. Change your axis so we can bring out the sides. Take a look at which way our arrow's going here. Change this. Bring that towards us. Basically, do a lot of different stuff. Now, we have all our displacements currently selected, so we're just kind of able to just freely grab anything and move it around, which is nice. Move all these guys. Let's say we didn't, we unclicked this guy, we were just selecting a couple faces. Now, what's going to happen, quite easily, is as we start moving our points, you'll see this obvious gap, this break. We've lost the seal between these displacements. Remember, they don't actually seal us from leaks the rest of the world. If we were to want to walk through this, we need to create a big brush box all around it that seals it from the void. But we also want to be able to keep these edges sewn together. So, these adjacent edges. So if we grab this and we're working on it, kept moving our axes, we would very easily start breaking our displacements apart, and we have these ugly holes. So we can grab multiple displacements at one time and hit the sew button. Zip those pieces right back together. You can select multiples at one time. We can grab this guy, this guy, this guy, this guy, all around. And make sure, we're going to grab this guy, make sure everything sews right back together. Now there are rules for what you can and can't sew. It can be really frustrating to get in there, create a lot of different displacement geometry, and then realize that you've moved a few things that can't sew. It's good to know that displacements can certainly overlap, so worst case you typically just kind of move a displacement into another displacement or into a brush to seal it off and close your gap. But it is nice to be able to sew displacements, especially when creating large sections. So let's take a look at this little scene I got set up and show you some of the rules for sewing displacements. The most basic form of displacement sewing is between two displacements of the same power, the same displacement powers. You can easily grab two displacements of the same displacement power and simply click sew to sew along their common edge. As long as those displacements share a common edge and have coincident endpoints, meaning that those displacements are basically the same size, perfectly sewable. You can also sew displacements to non-displacement surfaces. So here we have a brush, not a displacement, next to displacement. As long as they're adjacent, they have the same endpoints, I can sew a displacement surface to a non-displacement surface, which comes in really handy when creating your levels. So you want to be sure that when you're creating displacements, you create them of similar sizes. We can also sew displacements that are exactly half the size of other displacements. So this displacement is exactly 2 times the length of this displacement, sharing a coincident edge with the endpoint and the center point. Doesn't matter the level of power, but these two guys are also sewable. If this were a longer brush, didn't meet with the middle point, I would be unable to sew completely. You get one edge that's sewed up, but not the rest. But if it is exactly half the other displacement, both endpoints will sew successfully. Of course, you can also sew displacements of different power or resolution settings. What will happen is the higher power object will have its points meet the lower objects. Again, as long as they share coincident edges. Sew those guys up. So, have fun with sewing. That's displacements.